Imagine a room where the air itself seems to hold its breath. A hush falls, not the kind that comes from a quiet crowd, but the kind that comes from collective disbelief. It's January 30th, 2026, and the world has just lost one of its brightest, most irrepressible lights. Catherine O'Hara, the Canadian-American actress whose wit and heart had charmed audiences for decades, is gone at 71. If you think you know Catherine O'Hara from the laughter she inspired in Beetlejuice, Home Alone, or Schitt's Creek, you are only seeing half the picture. Because behind that mischievous smile and razor-sharp humor, there was a woman whose depth, compassion, and quiet resilience touched every corner of her life, and her death left a void that Hollywood and the world at large are still grappling to understand. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever considered what it really means when someone like Catherine O'Hara dies? Not just the loss of a celebrity, but the loss of a force that shaped how we laugh, how we empathize, and how we see the eccentricities in ourselves and others. Some people leave legacies in monuments or accolades. Catherine left hers in moments, fleeting, unforgettable moments. And now, as the news spreads, those moments are being collected and revisited with both awe and a creeping sense of finality. Within hours of her death, tributes began pouring in from every corner. Fans flooded social media, sharing clips, quotes, and personal stories of how Catherine's performances had transformed even the simplest day. Co-stars and collaborators reflected publicly, and yet, one tribute stood out above all. Meryl Streep, arguably the most respected and celebrated actress of her generation, speaking not from a place of professional courtesy, but from genuine, profound grief. Streep, who co-starred with O'Hara in the 1986 film Heartburn, described Catherine as a woman whose talent extended beyond acting. Catherine O'Hara brought love and light to our world, Streep said, through whip-smart compassion for the collection of eccentrics she portrayed. Her death is such a loss for her family, her friends, and the audience she graced as friends. Simple words, but weighty, charged with decades of friendship, shared laughter, and mutual respect. And yet, as powerful as Streep's tribute was, what she revealed next stunned everyone. It hinted at stories, secrets, and nuances of Catherine's life that few had ever witnessed, a human complexity behind the public persona. Catherine's life was never straightforward. Born in Toronto, she was the youngest of several siblings, raised in a household that valued humor but also demanded resilience. From an early age, Catherine displayed a combination of wit, creativity, and fearlessness that set her apart. Teachers and friends often remarked that she could light up a room with her presence, but she was never the kind of person to rest on easy charm. Even as a child, Catherine's humor was layered, perceptive, sometimes mischievously cutting. She had an uncanny ability to see the absurdity in life and to translate it into laughter, but she also had a keen understanding of human frailty. Perhaps that combination is what made her performances resonate so deeply. Audiences sensed the authenticity, the heart behind the comic timing. But her path was not without struggle. Breaking into Hollywood as a Canadian woman in the late 1970s and early 1980s was no easy feat. Rejection was common. Auditions that should have been stepping stones often ended in disappointment. There were days when Catherine wondered if she would ever find a role that truly matched her talent, a role that allowed her to express the full range of her genius. And yet, she persisted, driven not by ambition alone, but by a profound desire to tell stories, to inhabit characters with honesty and nuance. The world that would come to adore her did not see the countless moments of doubt, the quiet defeats, and the relentless self-questioning that accompanied every step forward. That's why the news of her death cut so deeply. It was not just a farewell to a beloved actress, but to a woman who had endured, thrived, and inspired. Even before her passing, Catherine was revered not only for her film and television work, but also for her ability to elevate those around her. Meryl Streep's tribute captured this perfectly. In Heartburn, their collaboration was seamless, two powerhouse performers creating magic on screen. But the bond between them went beyond professional admiration. Streep spoke of Catherine's humanity, of her compassion, and of a generosity that extended to co-stars, crew members, and anyone lucky enough to know her personally. What she did not reveal in that brief statement, but which later surfaced through anecdotes, was the quiet mentorship Catherine offered younger actors, the kindness she showed in moments that no one else noticed, and the subtle ways she lifted others while never diminishing herself. These stories painted a picture not only of a brilliant performer, but of a deeply empathetic human being. The funeral itself was a spectacle of emotion. Attendees included industry legends, lifelong friends, family members, and fans whose lives had been touched by her work. The air inside the chapel was thick with grief, respect, and awe. Every word spoken seemed amplified by the magnitude of the loss. Meryl Streep's tribute became the centerpiece of the service, but it wasn't simply the words that captivated those present. It was the way she spoke them, with a mix of reverence, humor, and raw honesty. Her voice carried the weight of years of collaboration and friendship, and as she described Catherine's unique ability to bring light into dark moments, some in the audience were moved to tears. Yet even in those tears, there was laughter, because anyone who truly knew Catherine understood that her spirit could not be contained by sorrow alone. What makes this story compelling now, more than just a record of a funeral, is the way in which Catherine O'Hara's life and death continue to ripple outward. She leaves a legacy not only in the roles she played, but in the countless individuals she inspired, guided, and comforted. Meryl Streep's words remind us that Catherine's influence was not limited to the screen. It was personal, profound, and enduring. And the more people recount her stories, the quirky, the heartwarming, the deeply human, the more it becomes clear that her life cannot be summarized simply by the characters she portrayed. There is a hidden dimension, an intimacy, a series of behind-the-scenes moments that are only now emerging in the wake of her passing. But even as we reflect on her impact, questions remain. What were the moments that defined her privately, away from cameras and spotlights? How did she navigate personal losses and triumphs that the public would never see? And perhaps most compelling of all, what did Meryl Streep reveal that stunned those in attendance? A revelation so powerful it changed the conversation about Catherine O'Hara forever? The answers to these questions are not immediately obvious, and teasing them will keep us turning the page, watching the story unfold, and uncovering the layers of a life that was as complex as it was brilliant. Catherine O'Hara's death also invites reflection on the fleeting nature of fame and the permanence of impact. She was an actress, yes, but she was also a storyteller, a confidant, a humorist, and a friend. The laughter she created was more than entertainment. It was a lens through which millions viewed the absurdity, vulnerability, and beauty of life itself. And in losing her, the world is forced to confront not only the absence of that laughter, but the presence of a legacy that demands recognition, remembrance, and, most importantly, understanding. That is why this story matters. Because her influence is still here, vibrating in films, in television, and in the countless memories of those she touched, a force that will endure long after the last frame has faded. And just as the introduction of a novel leaves the reader aching for the first chapter, this moment leaves us on the precipice of discovery. We know Catherine's brilliance. We know Meryl's tribute. But the deeper stories, the private moments, the little-known revelations, the laughter and heartbreak behind the scenes, are only beginning to emerge. And that is where our journey starts. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what shapes a comedic genius? Is it natural talent, sheer luck, or something far messier, something forged in quiet struggles and unseen heartbreaks? Catherine O'Hara's story begins long before the bright lights of Hollywood, long before the applause, the awards, and the laughter that filled living rooms around the world. It begins in Toronto, in a modest household where humor was both a shield and a lifeline. Catherine was the youngest of several siblings, and from the very beginning, she had to fight for attention. But she didn't fight with anger or defiance. She fought with wit. Even as a child, she had this uncanny ability to observe, to notice the subtle, ridiculous, and absurd. Family stories recall a little girl who could mimic a teacher perfectly in one breath, and then soften it with a tiny gesture of charm so that nobody was hurt. Her humor was never mean-spirited. It was sharp, yes, but always tinged with empathy. This combination would become the hallmark of her career, razor-edged comic timing with a heart at its center. Yet talent alone wasn't enough. The early years were far from easy. Her parents were supportive but practical, deeply rooted in the belief that success required discipline and sacrifice. Catherine's curiosity and creativity often ran ahead of the conventional paths her family envisioned for her. She loved theater, sketching, performing, and creating characters that were already fully formed in her mind. But the world outside her family home was less forgiving. Canadian television and theater in the 1960s and 70s were small, competitive spaces. Opportunities were limited, and women often had to fight harder to be taken seriously. Catherine's journey was marked by a series of near misses and small victories, each shaping her resilience. Her first auditions were humiliating. Stories have circulated of her waiting hours in freezing studios, dressed awkwardly, only to be told politely that someone else had been chosen. Each rejection chipped at her confidence, yet something inside her refused to break. What most don't know is that those early defeats planted the seeds for the empathy that would later define her performances. Watching others struggle, feeling the sting of rejection herself. It allowed Catherine to step into the shoes of any character with authenticity. She understood failure intimately, and she transformed it into art. At school, Catherine's creativity was apparent, but it wasn't always encouraged. Teachers would praise her talent, yes, but they were often baffled by her restless energy. She didn't follow rules the way others did. She improvised, she challenged norms, she made jokes in moments where silence was expected. And yet, those very qualities would later become her most prized assets. The world Catherine would eventually conquer was a world that demanded conformity. She built her success by refusing it, quietly and consistently, one audacious choice at a time. Her teenage years were pivotal. Catherine discovered improv and sketch comedy, immersing herself in clubs and theaters where experimentation was encouraged. It was a revelation. Here, she could channel everything she was feeling. Frustration, humor, longing, and observation into performances that made people laugh and think simultaneously. These early experiences taught her not only how to entertain, but how to connect. She learned that comedy was not just about jokes, it was about humanity. But life wasn't all laughter. Catherine's personal world had its share of challenges. She witnessed the fragility of human relationships, the heartbreak of unfulfilled expectations, and the subtle pressures of family responsibilities. She carried these experiences quietly, never letting them overshadow her light, but instead letting them add depth to her performances. There is a surprising contradiction here. The woman who could make an entire room roar with laughter often carried private moments of doubt and sorrow. Have you ever noticed how the people who make us laugh the hardest often feel the weight of the world most acutely? Catherine was one of those people. When she first began pursuing professional roles in Canadian television, the grind was real and unrelenting. Every day demanded reinvention, reinvestment, and a stubborn refusal to give up. She would travel to auditions, sometimes taking 2 buses and a subway just to reach a studio. She lived frugally, often sleeping in cramped apartments, subsisting on minimal paychecks, driven by a single, unwavering belief. She belonged on the stage, on the screen, in front of audiences who didn't yet know they needed her. It was a gamble, a leap of faith that few had the courage to take, and it paid off in ways that even Catherine could not have imagined. One pivotal early moment stands out. Catherine had been cast in a minor role for a television sketch show, a role many would have dismissed as insignificant. But she transformed it, infusing it with character, nuance, and subtle humor. The producers took notice, critics began murmuring, and for the first time, people outside her immediate circle saw what those closest to her had known all along. Catherine O'Hara was extraordinary. But there was a catch, and this is where the tension begins to build in her story. That breakthrough almost never happened. The director initially wanted someone else, someone more conventional. Catherine's persistence, charm, and sheer talent forced a reconsideration, but only barely. Imagine if she had been overlooked. The world would have missed the woman who could make absurdity feel real, who could make eccentricity lovable, who could make every character unforgettable. This early period of struggle is essential to understanding Catherine O'Hara, because it explains the unique blend of empathy, resilience, and audacious creativity she carried throughout her career. Every character she played, every joke she delivered, every eccentric persona she embodied was informed by these years of challenge and perseverance. And perhaps more importantly, these early trials instilled in her a humility that would endear her to colleagues and audiences alike. She never assumed admiration or fame would come easily. She knew its value. But even as she stood on the brink of a breakthrough, the story is far from over. Because behind the laughs, behind the applause, Catherine's life was still filled with questions, conflicts, and unexpected twists that would test her more than any role ever could. And what came next? The first real taste of Hollywood, the collaborations with legends like Meryl Streep, and the challenges of sustaining a career while staying true to herself, would change everything. But what came next almost nobody saw coming.